Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the MagicJank podcast, the weekly show where members of Team MagicJank get together and we talk about the latest happenings in Magic the Gathering. My name's Graham, I go by HamHawks42 on the internet, and I'm joined by the one and only Seafair Verdo Jr., also known as Karlo. I suppose I probably should have said that the other way around. But yeah, Karlo, how you doing, man?
Doing good. Playing a lot of Magic. Getting ready for MagicCon Chicago that we're going to talk about today. But yeah, overall doing great.
Heck yeah, man. Yeah, I'm right there with you. So yeah, Murders at Karlov Manor just came out like a little bit ago, and I don't know about you, but I'm still very much in brew mode. I'm still very much tinkering with all the different cards that they gave us, and I've only managed to crash the server with Doppelgang a handful of times. I really need to, up that number, because it is possible, it is doable, and it's great when it works. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually just played a deck of Doppelgang myself the other day.
Excellent.
Surprisingly, made a bunch of copies of my opponent's Urabrask's Forge, which was a game winner.
That'll do it.
That was a fun time.
Heck yeah. It's funny, I was actually playing against somebody earlier today, and they actually managed to make 3 copies of my Oracle of the Alpha with their own Doppelgang. I was like, I can't even be mad. Like, yeah, you got it. Yeah. Yeah, it was fun. It was a good time. So yeah, things got weird. Things get very weird with Doppelgang. The other one that I gotta do a big shout out to Yuck Foozy for suggesting Doppelgang and Hinata. If you get a mirror, you get a mirror box into the mix, you can get 3 Hinatas. You can just, make the entire board. The server buckles really hard under that one. Yeah, they cannot handle. Yeah, there's a token limit, but there is not a trigger limit. So yeah. It still tries to calculate it. Yeah, it doesn't end well. But it's fun to see, let me tell you what. But yeah, so in any event, so we're going to dive into kind of that with a little bit of a focus on the competitive angle as well, because a lot of, maybe more of an impact than we expected is shaping up in the competitive scene as well, which is really cool to see. So I don't know about you, but I know going into a larger standard, I didn't expect to see Karlov Manor make any meaningful impact. I kind of assumed that at this point, even before we saw this set, I was just kind of assuming, well, standard without rotation, we got friggin' 10 sets in it or whatever at this point. I kind of assumed any new set that drops, the good stuff mid-range piles will pick their 1 or 2 new, decent pieces of tech, and we'll just move on, and that'll be that. I never expected to see a really big, substantial change. But that's not the case here. We actually have a brand new deck that is stepping up and really putting up some numbers. So what do we have going on here?
100%. So like we have talked about here on the podcast, right? We asked ourselves this question, is this new set going to reshape the format? In terms of have new decks, like a bunch of new decks with like exclusively Karlov Manor cards, not so much. There's kind of one that's there that enables a certain combo. We'll get to that in a bit. But I think what it's done is it has allowed decks that were like tier 2, like able to be played, jump to that S tier quickly. And I think the number 1 deck that we're all calling like the deck is cracked is Boros Convoke, which most certainly was a playable option if you wanted to play on the arena ladder with it. It was fast. You're talking about playing with cards like Imodane's Recruiter that we knew we had, Knight Errant of Eos, of course, to help refill your hand. But it's got a lot of new toys. And then one of the new toys that is really exemplifying the deck is War Leader's Call. Now, War Leader's Call, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you can see this on the screen. It is an enchantment that costs 1, a red and a white. Creature you control get +1/+1. So that's an Anthem effect. But it also says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, the War Leader's Call deals 1 damage to each opponent. So, the reason this card is important for the Anthem side is because a lot of your creatures early on when you play them are 1 power. So this just jumps them to that next level, right? But also, you get to play sweet cards in this deck like Gleeful Demolition.
Oh.
Now, that card costs 1 red, blows up an artifact. If it was your artifact, you get 3/1/1 Phyrexian Goblins. Okay? You can destroy your own artifacts that are created by your 1-drops. So Voldaren Epicure creates a blood token. Brand new from Karlov, Manor.
Novice
You have
Inspector.
Novice Inspector that creates a clue token when it enters the battlefield, right? This is the functional reprint of Thraben Inspector that we've seen in the past. So if you can rock out a turn 1 Novice Inspector or Voldaren Epicure, on turn 2, play a land, cast Gleeful Demolition on the artifact, tap all of the creatures and your second land, and you get to play Knight Errant of Eos on turn 2. And that's going to fill your hand with your other pieces you need for the rest of the game, right? It's going to let you go look up Immodane's Recruiter. So on turns 3 or 4, slam it down. Creatures have a bunch of haste. It's going to let you search up more 1-drops to create more artifacts. And it's going to protect you from Wrath spells. So if you're expecting to get Wrathed by like Brotherhood End on turn 3, you don't lose your Knight Errant of Eos. Mm-hmm. If you're expecting to get depopulated on turn 4 or Sunfalled on turn 5, at least it's refilled your hand after you've played this, right? So you have some threats you can play after the fact. This card's very, very versatile. You obviously never want to spend 5 mana for it, because then you're just 5 mana in for a 4/4. Yes, you might not get to hit your opponent on turn 1 or 2, but that doesn't matter when you swing for 21 on turn 4 or 5. So, you know, this deck, like I mentioned before, was played, but not really that great. But the new Karlov Manor cards really bring it to the forefront. One uncommon that I do want to point out, which is sort of like a card of contention in terms of how many you should be playing your deck, is actually an uncommon from Karlov Manor. That is Case of the Gateway Express. And this is one of the new case cards. It is an enchantment. For 2 mana, it says when it enters the battlefield, choose target creature you don't control, and then each of your creatures deal 1 damage to it. So no fighting needed, just pinging it to get a creature off the battlefield. To solve the case, you had to have attacked with at least 3 creatures during the combat. Easy peasy. Gleeful Demolition makes 3 creatures for you, right? Then once the case is solved, all of your creatures get +1/+0. So that Anthem type of an effect, your 1 power creatures now are all 2 power, at least. So this card is a rock star, especially against other aggro decks, other mid-range decks. If you ever wondered why or how, you know, your 1/2s are going to be able to get through a 3/3 Glissa Sunslayer, this is the answer, right? You
100%.
just play a bunch of 1 power creatures and you kill the Glissa and you attack anyway. So yeah, this deck is very, very good. There's a couple versions of it out there right now, and some of them are just like straight creatures. War Leader's Call, Gleeful Demolition, Case of the Gateway Express. Some versions of the decks are playing Regal Boonicorn, which obviously gets more powerful for each of the non-land permanents you have. Some don't bother playing this card, right? You know, Warden of the Inner Sky from Ixalan is a great rare in this deck.
Yep.
Some versions are playing Sanguine Evangelist, also from Ixalan. That card has Battle Cry, so it pumps those 1 power creatures up, gets you a flyer and a bat. It's very good. Different versions of this deck play different numbers of these cards. So there's not necessarily one whole streamlined version, but both versions are doing fantastic. Whether you take a look at data from like Magic Online leagues, challenges, preliminaries. There was even a Japanese tournament over the weekend, the Japan Standard Cup, with over 500 people playing Paper Standard and tons of Boros Convoke in the top lists there. So the deck is now clearly a force to be reckoned with.
I love it. Well, and it's not really super surprising that a hyper aggressive deck is able to step into the meta, because it just lines up so nicely against Domain, which is something that I know we've kind of been a broken record on this over the last couple of weeks, because, you know, right now there's the litmus test in Standard. Can it beat Domain? If the answer to that is no, it's not gonna, you know, if it doesn't have a decent chance to beat Domain. If the answer is no, it's just not going to be able to play, because you're going to see Domain some amount in any event that you go to. And something that is this fast, this low to the ground, it's one of the best ways to take domain out. And so it just lines up, It's really the bottom line. And I'm also not super surprised. You mentioned it, that we've seen various Boros aggro decks around. People have been trying it for a while now, but I think the addition of War Leader's Call, the Case of the Gateway Express, is like a great piece of removal that does line up nicely in that deck. And then I also think the Novice Inspector is also like huge. I think like it's easy to overlook that because the War Leader's Call is the big flashy rare, right? It's the one that does all the different things you want. It's good if it shows up before the creatures. It's good if it shows up after the creatures. It does everything. And yeah, obviously that kind of ties the room together and it makes the whole deck just work better when it's in there. But honestly, I think Novice Inspector just being a really solid one drop that is an extra copy of Voldaren Epicure at the very worst. And at best, it's a body online that also draws you another card. Like, that's just great. And it even has 2 toughness to boot. Like,
yeah. So it's blocking all the early things. The other thing that's really good about it and how well this deck synergizes with all the cards in it. You could play Novice Inspector on one, get that clue token, and then play Warden of the Inner Sky and another one drop, like another Novice Inspector or Epicure on turn 2, and tap everything that just came into play, and you're pumping your Warden up. Get this with 3+1/+1 counters on it, and the game's over unless your opponent removes this. Flying Vigilance, turns out, with a card that has a bigger butt than it does power, is pretty good. Yeah. And considering you have decks like Dimir Midrange that are playing like Fairy Mastermind and Spyglass Siren and Malcolm, this card overpowers it, right? The 2/1's never getting through. This is infinitely attacking and blocking unless they have removal. So, like I said, all of the cards in this deck really synergize well with each other. So when I say that this is like a cracked deck, this is the deck that clearly went from down here, like tier 2 to S tier, and it made that jump all because of these cards from Karlov Manor. So it's a perfect example of what deck can really take the most resources out of the new set and make that jump. And I think in a standard metagame where Domain was the big bad going into the RCQ season at the end of January, you see all of these decks trying to come out of the woodwork to see, do I have a good Domain matchup? Great. Do I also have a good matchup in the mirror? Because that's going to be super important, right? Something that we saw with the Bant Toxic decks that came out of that woodwork, right? And it's like, I can be fast enough, defeat Domain before they Sunfall me. That check mark, right? But how does the Bant Toxic deck beat itself in the mirror match? Because if everybody's bringing Bant Toxic to beat up on Domain, you got to have something for the mirror. And that answer was Malira, right? To prevent you from getting poison counters. And, also like minimally good against some other decks. But that's definitely the check. And as a result, you see Domain taking a step back in the metagame. These aggressive decks, ironically, are rising to the top, even though we have 36 possible copies of Wrath spells in the format. And I'm just talking in like Ordzoff colors, black and white. That doesn't even talk about Burn Down the House or Brotherhood Ends. Right. How are these aggro decks doing so well in the current metagame with that many Wraths?
That is a great question. And it's funny because as a brewer, I feel the number of Wraths. The amount of time that we've been to the point where it's like, okay, I'm just about set up, about to do the thing, Sunfall. That's something that everybody who's trying to build their own kind of things on, in the current standard, we all feel it. We know that. But it's funny because you hear, or at least I know that I hear in the conversation, people are like, well, the threats are all so good. Of course, there need to be a lot of Wraths or a lot of really cheap answers if Control's going to have any chance. And this is testament to that. The reality is, even with all these fantastic Wrath options, because now we have Depopulate, we have No More Lies. There are not No More Lies. Sorry. No Witnesses.
Witnesses, yeah.
So yeah, we have No Witnesses. We have, and we still have Sunfall. Farewell is still legal. We now have Deadly Cover-Up, so even Black has a hard destroy all creatures board wipe. There's the Brotherhood's End temporary lockdown. I mean, the amount of answers that exist right now, and those are only the playable ones. The like Vanquish the Horde never rotated. Fun fact, guys. I mean, just so the amount of options,
and people should be playing that card right now.
I mean, the number of options that we have are absolutely bananas. And the truth is, these aggro decks are still winning consistently, and we don't even have a true control deck in the format. Like, control's not really playable right now. You know, you're either doing aggro, mid-range, or ramp. Like, those are your choices. It's not right. There's no question, or there's no thought of control anymore. Yeah. And it's kind of wild. So yeah, these aggro decks, the reality is they're just so fast and so efficient. I mean, this Boros deck, like you were saying, you can put it together 21 power by turn 4 very consistently. It's kind of wild. And the number of different combinations you can get to get you there, it's a lot. So it's it's kind of nuts that's where we are right now. But it's really a testament to how efficient the creatures are, how quickly they put power on the board, and how they replace themselves, draw cards, give you additional resources. It's all there. They do it all right now. So
it's been amazing to see, and you know how this data then reflects at paper RCQs, right? Like, I've been playing an RCQ every weekend that I can play one because we gotta qualify. But how everything shapes up on the arena ladder. So whether you're looking at untapped data or something else, and Magic Online data, and any paper tournaments that might be going on. So not all RCQs are publishing the deck lists that do well, so that data is not being captured. But if it is a deck that's done well at like an SCG con, they do post like RCQ winners or re-CQ winners, and their lists and how they did. Like, did they go 5-0 to get a qualification? And it's interesting to me, and I mentioned this before, you know, I think paper RCQs are bringing people who have only ever played Arena back into the paper Magic fold. And I know I talked about this on a previous cast about an individual I played that was playing the blue-white mill deck that I've only ever seen on Arena. And then I saw him again 3 weeks later at this last RCQ I was at.
Heck,
and he's still playing the same deck with Teresian Mindbreaker.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's the cards he has. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't play Arena, you wouldn't have seen this deck. So you are flabbergasted, right? You're like, what's going on here?
Yeah, how do I sideboard? Like, good luck.
Right, exactly that. And so it's interesting to see how that paper metagame is so different from what we see on Arena and Magic Online. Like, I would still say at least 20% of the metagame of the RCQs I've been at is still Domain, right? People still realize that it's a good deck. Decks that started to creep up there were like the 5-color Legends decks, which are enjoyable to play. But it's a lot of brain power to make sure you're playing the right creatures at the right time and holding back your Urtais as counter spells and stuff like this. And then another deck has started to emerge out of Karlov Manor that was kind of like tier 2 or best of 1 ladder on Arena only. And those are Squirming Emergence decks. They are making a significant impact in terms of some of the paper Magic RCQs. I saw this with the first RCQ of the season, and I'll never forget, my friend I was sitting with was like, this guy just cast Squirming Emergence over there and put an Atraxa into play on like turn 4 or 5. I said, yeah, that's the Squirming Emergence deck. And he's like, you know about that? And I said, yeah, I literally play Arena all the time.
Yeah, I see
that. If you up in best of 1, people are trying to Squirming Emergence myself every day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's legit. And I'm like, but wait, this guy brought a sideboard? Because I never used to see it in best of 3 at all. Always best of 1. And turns out Karlov Manor gave these Squirming Emergence decks a couple extra goodies to maybe make it this bigger Reanimator shell that's doing well.
Well, I mean, there were the Surveil lands for sure.
Yeah,
like those,
huge improvements.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
Yeah.
Because those decks aren't casting a spell on turn 1, and sometimes
No.
not on turn 2 either. They're just trying to get their target into the yard and get that descent number as high as they can, as quickly as they can. But still doing shenanigans like one with the multiverse and
Of
Portal
course.
to Phyrexia and stuff like this.
Of course, yeah. Portal to Phyrexia is here. It is playable in standard in 2024.
Again.
It's here. It's yeah. People are still doing it. Everybody.
Yeah. So just the land cycle alone are making decks more playable than they were before, which is great to see.
Oh my goodness, yes.
It's always so funny to look at people's reactions, like at the paper Magic tournaments, because they're like, "I had no idea this was the thing. I've only been testing on Magic Online," and I'm like, "Now you have to take a look at the whole picture.
You absolutely do.
Especially if you have newer players showing up that are playing decks they've only seen on Arena. Like, they exist. They are real. They are valid. You have to be prepared for these types of decks that maybe aren't necessarily tier 1, but they're the rogue decks that they're hoping can combo you out on an early turn. So
Absolutely. Well, and that's where, effects, one of the best sideboard cards, although we're in a situation where the green isn't very popular these days, but cards like Tranquil Frillback that have the opportunity to blow up a graveyard or destroy an artifact or enchantment, that have that modality end up being so important. And I think a lot of people don't realize that those kinds of tech pieces, at least coming out of the board, can make a huge difference. Just the opportunity to, it's funny, there are plenty of situations when I'm building out a sideboard, I'm doing it for best of 3 on Arena. So, but in that it's the Wild West. You never know what you're going to see out there. I mean, we know the meta, we know the top tier contenders, but it's kind of nice playing randomly on the ladder, especially at weird hours of the day. Cause, yeah, you might just get a weird random rogue deck that you were not prepared for. And I've gotten completely wrecked by a number of those. And so I've had a couple of times where building out a sideboard, it's like, I need to make sure I have plenty of disenchant style effects. And I need to make sure I've got something that can blow up a graveyard. Like, what graveyard deck are you worried about? I don't know, but I'll find them.
Right.
Yeah, they're out there.
And you got to be versatile with your threats to be able to combat them, because
exactly. Yeah.
Because standard is a larger format, right? 3-year versus 2-year rotation, more cards in the card pool. It's harder to slim down a solid 15 card sideboard now.
Oh my goodness.
Right? To try to fight all the decks in the meta plus the rogue decks. Right? So, what do you do if you're playing a Golgari deck? Do you go with Graveyard Trespasser, or do you play Unlicensed Hearse?
Ooh.
Right? What's the more versatile option? Answer is Unlicensed Hearse.
Right.
What's a card that's also good against mono red? Graveyard Trespasser. Right? Yep. So, and mono red still, I mean, hey, is a very viable deck in the format, even in best of 3. So you got to show up prepared to play against that. Knockout blows are like, what, a couple bucks a piece?
At this point,
you need that card against the fast red aggro decks.
Yep.
So, it, and I think the pillars of standard are the same as we've said a couple weeks ago. And you mentioned this, right? There's no control decks that are really viable in the format. You can try to play them. I've seen plenty of people take control decks. I see a more Dimir control than I do Azorius control on the paper RCQ tournaments.
I believe it.
Even though we have No More Lies, which is a blue-white card, and card is also great. Turns out giving solid black wraths make those decks more playable. But they realistically don't exist in this format. It is, like you said, ramp, aggro, mid-range. And you have to hope that the deck you're playing is able to attack all 3 of those pillars of the format in one way or another. Or at least 2, right?
Right.
At least 2 out of 3. And so, I don't know. There's lots of questions going on now. I see the discourse on Twitter. What should Domain do now? In my opinion, Domain should stop playing up the beanstalk, because that card alone is causing the Domain decks to lose against cards like Breach the Multiverse and Jace the Perfected Mind.
Yep.
And outrageous robbery now. It's a forced draw, so you can't say no. Once you have a couple on the battlefield, you cast your 5-mana spell, you got to draw 3 cards.
Mm-hmm.
And you think normally that's good for the person drawing 3 cards, but when you're taking so many cards out of your deck between Topiary Stomper, Invasion of Zendikar, Atraxa, this is going to add up very quickly.
Absolutely.
And cause these decks to deck out. And they need to start playing more threats for these aggro decks. So you see some versions playing Temporary Lockdown in the main. Fantastic card. Helps deal with the Boros Convoke deck. Helps deal with the Bant Toxic deck. Is okay against Mono Red. Okay even against, like, I don't know, the Dimir deck that plays a bunch of 1s and 2s. It gets rid of Schooner. In my opinion, all domain decks should be playing at least 2 Temporary Lockdown in the main.
100%.
Which means you can't play Beanstalk because it eats your Beanstalk, right?
True.
So play more threats that help you deal with those cheap aggro decks right out the bat.
Although, is it eating the Beanstalk necessarily a downside? Because you're saying having the Beanstalk into the late game, it does become very tricky, because if your opponent is grinding you out and your deck is thinner than theirs, which it likely will be at that point, any spell you cast has an opportunity to be your last if that up the Beanstalk's there. So Temporary Lockdown being a way to kind of eat the Beanstalk even in the late game, is that even a bad thing necessarily? I mean,
it's not terrible, but then, ask yourself the question, what other cards can I play in this slot that improves my aggro matchup? And if not for Temporary Lockdown, right? Domain doesn't play any early answers, and Leyline Binding against the aggro decks ain't great. So, are there other cards you could play in that slot instead that still get you some value, or whether it's removal or something like this?
Yeah, potentially. I'm wondering, thinking back, I know feels like ages ago now, there was a mono white deck in Standard that was very popular, running cards like Ambitious Farmhand and Spirited Companion. I mean, something as simple as a Spirited Companion, it's just a body that can chump block for you and it draws you a card when it enters. I mean, it's something like that, I don't know, maybe that's not enough value these days, but
right.
I don't know. I can't help but wonder if something as simple as that might be beneficial for those decks to at least consider. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
For sure. I like how we have lots of options. We certainly are not short of options in this format. And I kind of like how the Standard metagame is evolving. Not necessarily week to week, but maybe every 2 weeks you see a little shift here or there. So, I'm of the opinion where I'm enjoying that Karlov Manor has brought new toys to play with, as opposed to super powerful set full of cards that all the cards of your deck are the new deck, or the new cards. So, and that speaks to the design of the set. Designing cards with a lower power level that are meant to do exactly what has happened. So, in my opinion, the set's very well designed. Both from a limited perspective, I've had a blast playing limited, and from the effectiveness of the cards in Standard too. And I'm curious now that the Boros Convoke deck is so good in Standard, the impact that those new cards will make in formats like Pioneer. And I think 100% Boros Convoke has these great new tools. You can play Thraben Inspector and Novice Inspector in Pioneer. It's great. Have all the inspectors, make all the clues.
Heck yeah.
So it's certainly been a joy.
Yeah, that is interesting. I also love kind of a fun comparison, kind of a side-by-side of Murders of Karlov Manor and specifically the disguise mechanic as compared to Lost Caverns of Ixalan with the discover mechanic. I find those two set mechanics very interesting because both of them play well in limited. When we're isolated in this environment, okay, rock on. They work together. It kind of plays the way we want it to. The removal doesn't line up too badly, and you can have some good interplay. It does the thing. But on the one hand, one mirrors Cascade, is very similar to Cascade, which is one of the most busted mechanics they've ever printed, and a card had to get banned out of Pioneer in the first 2 weeks because of how insanely cracked it was the moment you put that mechanic into a larger card pool. Meanwhile, Disguise, the amount of really cool build-arounds that look really good compared to like old school Morph cards that are in the set is massive, and all of them are stone unplayable in Constructed because of how efficient removal is and because of how ubiquitous sweepers are. It's wild. So
yes, but and in regards to that,
yeah,
the card I've seen played the most that has Disguise on it, number 1 is the 2-drop red card that has Prowess and Haste. Then when it flips up, you get to wheel your hand.
Oh, yes.
What is that card called? It's the Goblin.
It's a Goblin. I don't recall the name at the moment. But yes, that one, I believe it was it was a rare, and its its Disguise cost is reduced for the number of instant sorceries in your graveyard, if I recall correctly. Fugitive Codebreaker.
Fugitive Codebreaker, thank you. Yeah, I've seen that card the most. Mono red decks trying to play it. I've seen some red-white aggro decks that aren't Convoke trying to jam this in, just as a way to refill your hand. Obviously, you're playing lots of cards like Play with Fire and Lightning Strike and Lightning Helix and the Festivities. You know, you're trying to play all of those cards, hedge the instants and sorceries in your yard, and this card has been playing well alongside Electrostatic Infantry, which is an uncommon that gets counters every time you play instants and sorceries. It's like a 1/2 trample at base. So more of like this spells sort of synergy for mono red. I've seen a couple decks like that. The other uncommon that I've seen played the most from Karlov Manor that also has Disguise on it. It is a 2-drop. It is called Flourishing Bloomkin. It is a plant elemental. So you can obviously cast it face down for 3, right? Paying that Disguise. And then flip it up for 5. And it gets +1/+1 for each forest you control. So this is Mono Green's best friend. And you get to put one of the forests that you search for it onto the battlefield. So when you flip it up, it's at least at minimum a 6/6, right? Because you got 6 power in play, and you got this +1/+1, for each forest you have. Downside, no trample. But we all know how we can fix that, right?
Yeah, there are many ways to fix that.
many ways.
Many ways.
So I'm enjoying this card in like the mono green builds that I'm seeing played. Mono green's still trying to make a name for itself, y'all. I'm sure you will see a lot of it as people start to brew, especially playing it with Archdruid's Charm, which is probably your favorite card from this set.
I love Archdruid's Charm. It's great.
Yeah.
That card is phenomenal, but I'm trying to find the right shell in Standard for it, and I am coming up blank. Now, I find it interesting that you mentioned the Flourishing Bloomkin, though, because this is if the mana base is all forests, which... If you're mono green, okay, great, obviously. But even if you're not, we have the Surveil lands, we have the Tri lands. Like, you could do a 2-color or even a 3-color build right now where all your lands are incidentally forest. A lot of them will be tapped. It won't be ideal, but you could do it. It's not crazy, you know. But actually, the ones that you search up, they are not basic forests. You just search for forests with this, which is kind of fun. But here we have a situation where, on its face, this is a forest Lurgoyf for 2. If you just completely ignore the Disguise, it's still a big sack of stats for 2 mana in a mono green list. So, and with the Codebreaker as well, it's a 2/1 haste prowess for 2. Even if you completely ignore the Disguise, it is competitive on its own. Back in the day with like Morph, that was not how they worked. They were either like 1/1s for 2 or 3 that did nothing if you didn't flip them face up.
They mostly changed the target spell with another target.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's the other. If you're ever in a commander game and you see a face down card, it's just Willbender. Right. Just be ready. In any event, but yeah, I mean these cards are competitive. Like Wizards clearly has identified that they're not you know, the cards with this effect, yes, if you are patient, if you invest the extra mana and the extra time into getting them to flip, you need a good reason and good payoff for having done so. So I appreciate that. But even if you're not worried about the disguise at all, in the right build, this could just be a really strong card. This strikes me as like the topiary stomper of this set.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, what I mean by that is this is the card that isn't going to make any waves for like a year and a half. And we're not going to think anything of it. Like, Topiary Stomper was legal for well over a year before Invasion of Zendikar got printed, and it was a non-factor. Like, and there were green lists. I mean, not a ton, but people were experimenting with it, and Stomper wasn't part of the deal. And then the moment, you know, Invasion of Zendikar showed up, all of a sudden that sequence of Stomper into Zendikar was like, oh, you know, incredible, and did all the things you wanted it to do. And all of a sudden that card went from this absolute nothing to something that was really powerful. Well, after the next rotation, you know, and I mean, Sunfall doesn't go anywhere, but we lose Farewell, and we lose a lot of the other, you know, interaction, and a lot of the other, you know, cheap threats that are currently still running around. Actually, I don't know that I fear this upcoming rotation won't have as much impact as we want, but that's the story for another day. But if green becomes viable at some point with the introduction of some new powerful cards and some other things leaving the meta at the very least, whether or not they leave the format, then all of a sudden this kind of a card, I mean, this thing could be pretty reasonably in a lot of green decks, you know, just a 6/6 for 2 in the late game. Like, no question, no problem. Just bam, it's just huge. And as long as, if mono green is viable, this could be really, really, really good. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's nothing right now because green isn't viable, but the moment green becomes viable, this will probably be a part of it.
You know, what card this really synergizes well with?
Ooh, what's that?
It's Nissa Ascended Animist. That also cares about the number of forests you have, right?
Oh my goodness.
You slam that thing down for 7, and you have a couple of those flourishing creatures on the battlefield, and that's a lot of damage.
You're doubling their stats and giving them trample. Yeah, that seems good.
14. Your 2-drop now becomes a 14/14 trample.
I mean, that's sorry.
Whatever that it takes you to pay 7 for that.
So turn 5,
You know.
Maybe turn 4. I don't know.
Turn. If you're counting not using the disguise ability on that card.
Well, the moment, if we're in, for as long as you're not disguising it, because you can get it down on turn 2 very easily. Because there are other, I don't think there are any good, you know, 1-drop ramp spells, you know, in standard right now. I mean, the Lore Keeper is the only one I can think of, but that's Dino specific, so that doesn't really do what we're looking for.
Right.
I don't know, but yeah, Nissa Ascended Animus is a house. This card is so good. I am shocked that there isn't some kind of green list right now really leveraging her. I know the Domain deck has started running it, and they're correct to do so, because she just wins games. Like, if Nissa Ascended Animus hits the field and goes unchecked, you're just gonna win the game.
Right.
You know, it's easy to think of it as
at worst, it's blowing up Leyline Binding. At best, it's pumping your 3/3 Beast from Herd Migration into a game-winning play.
Exactly. Like, yeah, if you do have the overrun, great. Like, if you have the board, awesome. But if you don't, and you drop this at 7, you uptick, you make an 8/8, or you downtick, blow up a Leyline Binding or a temporary lockdown or whatever your opponent used to mess you up earlier. And I don't know, this card is absolutely insane. And you know, it's not new necessarily, but we have Archewit's Charm. We have this, you know, our new Bloomkin friend. Man, when is green's time? Because when it happens, it's going to be great.
Shout out to Jarvis Moonbeam, who loves.
Green is his absolute favorite.
Mono green, favorite color in the world.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. It's yep, it is. And I remember having a conversation with Jarvis prior to the set dropping. He's like, "Yeah, I don't think the set's all that good." I was like, "What are you talking about? Green has all kinds of good stuff."
Listen, y'all, we got to have fun on this podcast when we can.
Absolutely. Groovy. If you're not hanging out, by the way, in the Magic the Gathering kind of Twitch universe, I highly recommend it. It's so much fun. There's a lot of amazing people hanging out all the time. That's a very self-serving comment, but it's true still, okay? There's a reason I want to hang out there too. All right. But yeah, so Flourishing Bloomkin, cool stuff. We see a lot of... There's one other deck that I want to touch on before we kind of move on to anything else, though. There's another card from Karlov Manor that... honestly, when I saw it, I knew of an interaction that I wanted to use with it. And I lost it. I had it earlier. Oh, no. But it's the new Sphinx So this
The
card,
detective.
yes, Conspiracy Unraveler. This is a detective. We talked about this during the preview, and I mentioned wanting to use this alongside Breach the Multiverse. I thought that would be for like Timmy Johnnies like me who just want to do the big crazy silliness, where it's all about just like doing the thing the one time, but the deck has a 10% win rate. But man, that one time is worth it. That's what I expected this to be. And then some mad genius out there was digging through their, I don't know, their bulk bin or their collection on Arena and saw just an absolute beauty of a common from Innistrad Crimson Vow in Repositories Scob.
Extended standard.
It's extended standard. This would have rotated. Yep, fun fact. With 3/3 for 4 with exploit. Whenever it exploits a creature, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So the way that works, you fire off Breach the Multiverse. You get to reanimate stuff. You reanimate the Sphinx if you have to at this point, or you can reanimate the Scob and something from your opponent, right? If you reanimate the Scob, it can exploit itself if you don't have another body line around. Actually, it's probably for the best if you exploit itself in this case, because then it brings the Breach the Multiverse back to your hand. Conspiracy Unraveler says you may collect evidence 10 rather than pay mana costs for spells you cast. And so Breach the Multiverse throws 10 cards into your graveyard to help you with collect evidence. The Scob brings the Breach the Multiverse back into your hand so you can then freak out, like, wait a minute, it all lines up, it all connects. And so sure enough, we have a situation where if this is the deck, if you're running this,
on no cards.
I mean, if you're running this, you get effectively infinite Breach the Multiverse casts. It doesn't end up being truly... Actually, I think you could go infinite, but in any event, you mill your opponent out is the idea. And heaven forbid your opponent's playing the Boros Convoke deck and you spin into their Immodane's Recruiter, give your whole board haste. But like, it's so silly.
It's unreal.
It's such a bizarre sequence.
And the funniest thing is you're doing this on like turn 4 or 5 because in reality, you are playing lots of cards in this deck that let you draw a discard actively. Yep. And you are playing the card Reenact the Crime to or beseech the mirror.
Yep, beseech the mirror.
Try to find these cards. So in a perfect world, on turn 2, you're playing like Rona, which lets you tap to draw a discard. Legendary spell untaps. You get to play the 2-mana artifact that lets you draw and discard a card and make a treasure token.
Collector's Vault. Yep.
And you're playing 4 of 3-mana Kaito from Kamigawa. Just a plus to draw and discard.
Yep.
So you're using all of these draw discard outlets to discard Breach the Multiverse to your yard, to then pay 4 to reenact the crime, to cast Breach the Multiverse on turn 4, and start this shenanigans. In the event you get like unlucky, let's say, with this, and you don't hit yourself the Sphinx to continue to go, you can always just reanimate Atraxa on turn 4 and start attacking for 7 in the air. Because, you know, why not jam Atraxa into the turn 4, reanimate some big creature deck?
I love how the plan B, the fail state of a standard combo deck, is something that would have been like the legacy plan A like 2 years ago.
And the other funny part is you can, because of the Sphinx, you can line up turns where you can cast Atraxa for 0 from your hand by collect evidence and find more Breach the Multiverse to cast for free.
This is so ridiculous.
It's fun. I don't know that the deck is anywhere near tier 1. If you can combo off, you combo off. If you're disrupted in your early turns and you got to go long, the deck typically does worse, right? Right. So definitely, it's a deck that's trying to get you early. If it can't get you early, GG. Right. But I think this deck is worth exploring. You know, between this and the Squirming Emergence decks, Like, we got to start questioning, are we playing more graveyard hate in Standard now? Like, do you want to lose to this? Because the one way you don't is from unlicensed hearse.
Yeah.
You know, so it maybe just makes us have to play that card again, which is totally fine.
Sure.
You know, jamming 2 of that card in your deck doesn't seem like it's the end of the world.
And the handful of people out there still holding out hope for the haughty Jin decks going, no, not again.
Yeah. Or playing cards like Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which might just be a better option. Like, let me exile your creature, give my creatures counters and abilities of other creatures.
Instant speed targeted graveyard hit like that in a lot of situations is exactly what you need. Hearst being able to hit 2 is better, but obviously the Soul Cauldron gives you extra utility beyond that your deck could probably take advantage of.
Yep.
So the key is just to understand the loop, you know. And also for folks playing in paper, one little thing I want to mention about Breach the Multiverse, because this is one of those situations where I have a feeling judges probably have to answer this question all the time about this card. If you have an Agatha Soul Cauldron or an Unlicensed Hearse, or, you know, anything that can at instant speed disrupt the graveyard, it cannot disrupt Breach. Now, once Breach is on the stack, if there's something already in the graveyard that you're scared about, yeah, you can hit that, that's fine. But the moment Breach starts to resolve, you mill the 10, and then the thing happens before you get priority. It's all part of one effect. So, of the milled cards, one of those is showing up on the battlefield. There's nothing you can do about it, unless, you know, you have some kind of Containment Priest effect, of which I don't think we have one at the moment. But, you know, that's how you would need to stymie that. Oh, no, I guess there's Soulless Jailer. Maybe that's an option.
Soulless
anyway.
Jailer. Yeah.
But in any event, outside of a Graph Digger's Cage kind of situation, it's happening. So, you can't interrupt there. But if you have the Agatha Soul Cauldron or an Unlicensed Hearse, and they do pull the Breach of the Multiverse, hit the Repository Scob, when they exploit it, if they only have 1 Breach in their graveyard at that point, that's the moment to fire it and pull the Breach out of there. Because that will disrupt the combo. So understanding how the combo works, and that's actually just a little PSA in general. If you're gonna go up against combo decks, understand the intricacies of that combo, even if you aren't gonna be playing it. And one of the best ways to do that actually is to practice with it. If you have the cards, if you have the beans,
100%.
you know, just understand how it works, because then you'll know how to break it. You know, if you know where to throw the wrench in to kind of bring the whole thing to a halt, you're gonna have a much better time. Yeah. So anyway.
And so, you know, the reason we're really talking a lot about Standard today, it's not just because of the set, like, of Karlov Manor mixing Standard up a little bit. I won't say shifting the metagame, but I will say mixing it up, which is always great. One is because it's Standard RCQ season until the end of March, right? So that's relevant for Paper Magic. But also, there are 2 Pizza Box Open tournaments this month. One coming up after you hear this recording this Sunday, which is free to play, by the way. And interestingly enough, off the 2 tournaments we had in January, we had Mono Red win the first one. Believe that. And Bant Toxic taking down the second one. Both decks to come fight against the Domain Menace. So the question is Domain still the menace of the format? And if it is, do these fast aggro decks continue to just trump them every time? If Domain isn't the menace anymore, and it's something like Esper midrange, or becomes the Boros Convoke deck, do we then get to see more control decks try to come in to combat the fast aggro decks? Will that bring a 4th pillar into the format? Who knows?
That'd be exciting.
Do people just start playing Golgari midrange again? Because that deck's still a thing.
It sure is.
And it's still pretty relevant against the other decks.
Yeah, I mean, the Glissa, Preacher to the Schism, Dread Knight situation, it lines up very nicely against those aggressive strategies. So, yeah, maybe that has an opportunity to step back up. I mean, the biggest issue that deck faces is, you know, all the exile removal of format or of decks like Domain. But in those last 2 tournaments that you mentioned, you know, I remember, you know, watching those and commentating on those, and the Domain lists, especially going into the top 8, I mean, they were present, And it's so funny because in the Swiss, kind of going up against the unwashed masses, you know, they look very strong, and it's like, man, how can anybody beat this? But then you actually see them go into a gauntlet of mono red and the banned toxic decks, and it's like they just get housed. It's wild how strong that matchup is in favor of those, you know, those very aggressive decks. And so, yeah, I have a feeling it's probably going to be falling out of popularity. I think a lot of people are going to be moving off of the domain lists. And so, yeah, as a result, I think some of these other, I don't know, more controlling decks or more mid-range focused decks will have a much better chance than they have recently. So that's exciting to see.
Yeah, I'm still very much a Preacher of the Schism fan.
Oh,
that card is fantastic. It got a little worse with Karlov Manor because of Long Goodbye. Being superior to cards like Cut Down and Go for the Throat, in my opinion, because it hits targets that some of these spells couldn't, right? Like you couldn't Go for the Throat Skrelv, but you can Long Goodbye. You couldn't Cut Down Preacher, but you could Long Goodbye. And it's uncounterable. So it also deals with cards like Rafine and Roaming Throne, if people are playing that card in Standard. Heyo.
Roaming Throne actually dodges it because it has 4 mana value, which is wild. But yeah,
right, correct. 4 mana value. But it also gets around the disguise cards.
Yes.
Right? So if you're disguising things face down for some reason.
Yeah, and
as is the theme.
And there's also, you know, decks there's some aggressive decks that are running like the Coppercoat Vanguard to give humans ward, that kind of thing. That you do see that from time to time. And so, yeah, having an answer to that is a big deal. Also, if you have never had the opportunity to just have a Long Goodbye and pick off a Rafine while on the draw on turn 2, oh, it is the best feeling in the world.
Try.
It's so good. Yeah, highly recommend. And
you know, this Preacher of the Schism card is pretty versatile. I mean, you could play it in Golgari, you could play it in Rakdos midrange, the Discover deck. It's fantastic. It's great against the aggro decks because it's a 2/4 and it has Death Touch, so they can't kill it with Lightning Helix or Lightning Strike unless they're going to do that post block. And in any way, you get value out of this card. So, you know, the Rakdos midrange deck is still very much a deck, y'all. By the way, just because we haven't talked about it much today doesn't mean it isn't there. It's widely popular at RCQs. Sometimes people playing NT into Preacher is as good as it is in Standard as it is in Pioneer. You know, plus
Sounds
Geological Appraiser, Carnosaur. It's all great. I'm still on the ramp plan for Rakdos. Listen, I've played 4 RCQs this season. The first one was a mistake. I should have never played Domain. The mirror match is terrible. Y'all have seen that on the Pizza Box tournament, right? It's grueling to watch Domain versus Domain. It's as worse, if not more, in paper, by the way. And I've been on this Rakdos ramp plan for the last 3, and I've top-8'd each of those tournaments, but haven't converted. So, like, the deck is good when Domain's good. So if you don't think Domain is going to be good this week, that means you got to hop off the ramp deck and maybe play the cracked Boros Convoke deck. Who knows?
Maybe that's the answer. I don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So lots of decks to choose from. In my opinion, we have a healthy Standard format. Even though there are more than 36 Wrath spells, especially one that has caused quite the controversy recently.
Yes, there is a card that is legal in Standard, and the funny thing is, it has been legal in Standard for so long that when you look it up on Scryfall, which is a tool that I absolutely adore, there are multiple printings since the original printing that brought it into Standard, and that is Farewell, still available in Standard. Yeah. So when it comes to, we were just in before we dive into all the controversy associated with that, which we will get into because it's an interesting conversation. But so you know, with what's going on right now, these low to the ground aggressive decks, I feel like that's what you need to be teched for. I feel like you need to be ready for those more necessarily than the Domain. Be aware of it. Don't forget about it. But I feel like it's going to be the what was the Runes deck from back in the day, where it's like just week in and week out. You never know. Yeah, you never know. It might be here, might not. Might be, maybe it'll be here this week, maybe it won't. And I think Domain is going to become that, because the top end power of that deck is insane. It absolutely is. And it's doing some like blatantly unfair things. But at the end of the day, it takes a second to get there. It's a little slow, and it draws way too many cards. So if you're going into the late game, you kind of like, it will kind of force fruition itself if you get greedy in the early game. It's wild. So it's not infallible, but it's very powerful. So if we stop being vigilant against it, it'll come back and become the thing again. But right now everybody's keeping it down. So yeah, it's very interesting. And I agree that is a sign of a healthy format, when it will shift on its own. And that's what we've got right now. So
100%.
Love it. Cool. So farewell. If you're on Twitter, I'm sorry, but if you're out, I know, me too. If you're out on Twitter regularly, you may have seen a tweet that kind of exploded not too long ago, claiming that Farewell is the single most toxic card ever printed. It was my buddy Joel of Jake and Joel are Magic who threw out that take and had a really classy follow-up video, I thought. At the end of the day, I feel like it was handled very, very well for what it was. And of course, believe it or not, discourse on the internet just got out of control and insane. So
who would have thought?
I know, it's crazy, right? When enough eyeballs who have the opportunity to be anonymous get wind of something and have an opportunity to weigh in, some of them are jerks. Anyway, on both sides of the argument, for the record, or all 8 sides of the argument, or whatever the case may be. But the statement really just boiled down to, Farewell's an unfun card. Farewell's a toxic card, and in casual environments, it does not add fun to any game. It just doesn't. Like, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but it's basically a net negative to the experience. And in competitive environments, whatever. The goal is to win. The focus is on winning. That's fine. But in a casual environment, it adds time to the game, makes rebuilds almost impossible. And if you don't have a reasonable follow-up, all you're doing is extending the game for almost no value. So...
yeah, we just had this situation the other night. Remember,
yes.
we were playing on Trying Casually stream,
Mm-hmm.
and I was playing my Gandalf the White deck, and the deck wasn't doing incredible things, right? I mostly did nothing all game, but there was a point in time in the game where I drew my copy of Farewell, and I could have slammed it down and said all targets or all modes, and the game would have went on for another hour
easily.
And I was just like, nope, let's just use this to exile creatures. Everything else can stay on the battlefield. Let's continue the game. And then the game didn't go on for another hour.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's funny how those things work.
It's wild, right? Exactly. You were very selective about the modes. And I was also playing a Reanimator deck, admittedly. I know, surprise, right? But I was playing my Olivia Crimson Bride Rakdos Reanimator list. And like, had you selected graveyards, I had like 3 cards in my hand at the time, none of which would have helped me rebuild meaningfully. I would have been sunk, like something fierce. But with my, commander going back to the command zone, she was very expensive at this point. But like with a couple of things in the graveyard, I wasn't completely out, even though I didn't really have anything on board at this point. And you could have blown me out completely and cut me out of the game, entirely. Yeah. And as a result, we had a moment where the advantage swung in your favor. Notably, like, it was definitely a good strategic move, but the game was allowed to continue, and I don't even, and here we are. I don't even remember the outcome of that particular game, but I do remember that moment and thinking like, oh, that was how you should play that, because it has an impact on the board. It is a powerful card, but we're continuing, and the game, Anyway.
I love to play long commander games, right?
Sure.
I have no problem with that. But I think there's a distinct difference of playing a long game of Commander and playing one that you're playing cards that will extend the game and lead to a bad play experience for everybody. Like, for me, if Farewell is going to extend the game for another hour, I honestly would rather shuffle up all the cards and play a brand new game, right?
100%.
Instead of sit there for an hour with people who are having, like, negative vibes, not at you, but just because of what's happened in this game, right? And obviously this experience is different if you're playing like CEDH, which is trying to kill you in the first couple turns of the game.
Sure.
Versus, you're casual with like power level 5-6 deck, right? If you're playing higher powered, different story. Everybody's got to be playing a higher powered deck for progression. But if we're all playing this baseline, like we're chilling, we're having some drinks, we're having casual conversation playing Commander. This card ain't it. Just like point blank. And it's so interesting how like that tweet from Jake and Joel like got so much backlash.
Yeah.
And half of the people probably don't even play Commander, right? Or like are there to comment just to like give terrible takes about Commander, right? Farewell. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, come on.
Really? Yeah.
Listen, if and this is a nice PSA for everybody watching this podcast or listening to this podcast on the platforms it's on. You legit can buy any of the most recent precons. You've never played Commander before? Buy one of the most recent precons. They are so playable out of the box. You can play Commander with your friends who've had it forever. Farewell will ruin both of your times.
Yeah.
No matter what.
That is the bottom line. Yeah.
But if you want to dive into the format, that is a very easy way to do it. Buy a new precon. You can buy your Lord of the Rings precon or your Warhammer precon or your soon-to-be Fallout precon, right? That's coming out next month.
Yep.
But if you buy your standard legal one, like the Karlov Manor ones, the clue deck is chef's kiss, even though the general's not a merfolk. But
for reasons,
it's still very good, right? To play out of the box for a new player experience. Farewell makes us all have a bad time.
Yeah.
That's not saying that the card is too strong. It just doesn't let y'all have a good time. Not even for the person who casts it.
Right. Yeah, and I think the question that we need to ask is, okay, what is this card doing? And in the case of Farewell, it's usually just extending the game. And the fun thing is, Farewell's not the only one that we can point to for this either. There are a lot of cards like this. You know, the other one that comes to mind, of course, is Cyclonic Rift.
Oh, for sure.
That's the other one. But even then, I think I would prefer a Cyclonic Rift, because when an overloaded Cyclonic Rift hits, one player still has stuff. And so the chances of them just, I don't know, just doing the mercy killing and taking us out is at least there, right?
But I also think when you're the player casting Cyclonic Rift, the majority of the table has enough lands out to just replay what got rifted back to their hand.
Right.
So like the game can continue. It's just you've time walked everybody on the board for a turn, which is significantly better than exiling everything for an additional 20 turns of the game.
Right.
You know, I like to more or less compare power levels of Farewell with Merciless Eviction, which is considerably more fair of a card. Granted, Merciless Eviction is odds off, so you're more restricted from colors, but you only choose one mode, and Merciless Eviction can exile all planeswalkers, which Farewell cannot do.
Heck yeah.
This is much more fair of a card.
100%.
And had been a powerhouse for some time before Farewell.
Yeah, this was the tech before Farewell, absolutely. And I think the reaction, when you play a Merciless Eviction, you get the, when you play Farewell, you get, it's very different. You know, I've never seen, like, when Merciless Eviction hits, you know, there's usually the person who has the big board of tokens or whatever. It's just like, dang it. Like, okay, yes, you got me on this. Or the one person who's going like all equipments and you name artifact or whatever. Like, that does happen. But being limited to one mode is such an important difference to this. And it can't touch graveyards, which is nice. So yeah, I completely agree that, you know, if you have a deck right now where you have Farewell, I recently did this. I took Farewell out of my Abzan deck and I put Merciless Eviction back in. You know, it's like, I would rather scale this down a little bit to make something that isn't, if nothing else, I don't even want to be tempted to just be the jerk who fires off all modes. You know, I don't want to be that guy. Because, you know, there are times when if I'm going to stay in this game, I need to do that. But in a casual environment, well, is the goal to stay in the game and win at all costs, even if that wrecks the evening for everybody, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The other one that Farewell kind of reminds me of in this context, and I'm hoping I can even remember how to spell it, which I'm sure, this is an extreme example. This is hyperbole, but I want to draw this comparison to like set kind of the way I see it. Scheherazade. I don't know
okay.
if people know about Scheherazade. This is a sorcery that is banned in all of the formats forever because resolving it is one of the most frustrating experiences in all of Magic. It just is. It's goofy. If you're in some kind of cube format where you've got one and it can be a goofy thing that happens every so often, okay, sure, whatever. But I believe this was legal for like one tournament. I think it was like type 1 back in the day or whatever. And there was one tournament where people were allowed to have 4 of these, and every single round went over time, and they were like, nope, never again. Because the way that Scheherazade works is you actually play a sub-game within your game, and then the winner of that game determines who gets a benefit in the original game. And as you can imagine, you can cast a Scheherazade within the sub-game, and you can go into games within games, which is a funny idea in theory, but in reality, it makes a game... Like, it could make a standard style 60 card 1v1 game, not even a match, last like 2 freaking hours. It's absurd. Now, this is an extreme example, but it's banned in all the formats because it drags the game on to a point where no one is enjoying themselves anymore. And a poorly applied farewell does something very similar.
Right, exactly.
It just drags the game on and no one's having fun anymore. So don't do that. Don't Scheherazade your friends, everybody.
Don't.
Just don't do it. Yeah, and another example of this that we do see, I mean, like Hull Breacher got banned because of, you know, like the Hull Breacher wheel decks, where it just locks everybody out of the game and they just can't play. You know, that's a miserable play experience. That card got banned as a direct result. We still see Narset. You still see some people doing that. But it's one of those where if you don't disclose to the playgroup that that's what you're planning on doing beforehand, you will be labeled as just a supreme jerk. Mm-hmm. And those people will probably not want to play with you again because it just has that vibe to it. And Farewell's kind of that distilled onto a single card, not a full strategy. But still, it's, yeah. Just be nice. Be nice and encourage people to play their game. I'm a big fan of group hug effects in not necessarily group hug decks. Yeah, I think it's very important. Like Veteran Explorer is one of my favorite cards. And also, I just need to say, be the person who shows up with Howling Mine. Be the guy who brings Howling Mine to the party. Everybody loves that guy. Just be that guy.
And also, in case you ever want to be mean with this card, just find a way to tap the Howling Mine.
It's not hard either.
And then only you draw the extra card.
That's an option.
Everybody for sure attacks you first.
That does happen, yes. Yeah, you got your what is it? Moonsnare Prototype, and other like Springleaf Drum effects that allow you to tap artifacts. Yep. It's not hard. You can do it. Yeah. Or give it, improvise. Just I'm gonna tap this to pay for something. Like, yeah. Anyway, but you can do it. That tech is out there. But anyway, but when it comes to Commander, enjoy yourself, have fun, make sure other people are having fun too. Fun is the point. Winning, you gotta play to win, but first and foremost, make sure you're enjoying yourselves and the people around you are enjoying themselves as well. Mm-hmm. That's gonna be the best experience. Cool. So yeah, so that was I thought that whole debate, that whole discourse was interesting. I also am not surprised that Farewell was the card that sparked it. I think a lot of people have feelings about that. And so for a lot of people, that tweet was, thank you, somebody said it, and a whole bunch of other people saw an opportunity to, be contrarians, which I've been a contrarian plenty of times myself. So I shouldn't, as long as people are being nice about it, sure, whatever. But yeah. And other people were just full on trolls. Don't be trolls on the internet either, folks. Anyway, cool. So the only other thing that I wanted to talk about before we call it a show, in a recent, there's been some recent kind of scuttlebutt and some updates about apparently Chris Cox, I believe on an investor's call, made a comment. The CEO of Wizards of the Coast, actually CEO of Hasbro, made a comment that they are wanting to push multiple Lord of the Rings style Universes Beyond sets per year moving forward. So apparently the ideal is to have, so Lord of the Rings was a big successful release, and they want to apparently catch that lightning in as many bottles as humanly possible by firing off more and more of them moving forward. The Final Fantasy set was mentioned, as well as the upcoming Marvel properties. Apparently there will be multiple Marvel sets that are going to be very large sets, which, I mean, that's an IP that is very deep. So, okay. Multiple Universes Beyond sets in a year? Like full sets? Can we as a consumer base handle that?
In the long run, yes.
Okay.
Right? Because we've proved it already.
True.
right? Lord of the Rings, the top selling Magic set of all time, right? Universes Beyond set.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly, I would imagine, because of the popularity of Lord of the Rings, right? Just that
Sure.
particular IP. I mean, has fans. The chase to open up the one of one ring, which still, begs the question, do they do any more serialized one of ones?
Mm-hmm.
You know, who knows? We joked before on the podcast about one of one Infinity Gauntlet with the Marvel set.
Sure.
Or, I don't know if you can have a Final Fantasy like version of that.
I mean, the Buster Sword, maybe, but I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
there's nothing in that universe it fits that thematically.
Yeah.
At least none that I can think of.
And
Yeah.
I think you mentioned, like, in that call, they mentioned like from 2025 going forward. So obviously Marvel is like the big IP for 2025. So getting two of those types of sets in 1 year that are likely to be non-standard, because it wouldn't make sense for them to be standard, like, lore wise. So you're talking more straight to modern products, you're talking commander products, so on and so forth. This year, 2024, we get Assassin's Creed and Fallout were the two Universes Beyond projects, right? Fallout comes in a month. Assassin's Creed, I don't know, it's like 5 months away, maybe 6 months, right?
Something like
Assassin's
that.
Creed's
Yeah.
after Modern Horizons 3. So you're going to have two back-to-back sets that put cards straight into Modern. That's the first thing. So you are increasing the size of that card pool. And interesting, on top of that, there was Twitter discourse about putting cards straight into Pioneer, which for me is a big no-go. Like, leave that format alone. Leave
Yeah.
it be the extension of a format that you want it to be.
Right.
I personally, from my perspective, I just like playing Magic. I don't care what IPs are in it. The game is still Magic the Gathering to me, right? So what if my card is Ezio from Assassin's Creed and I
Right.
can play this card as my commander? Like, that's pretty cool. I'm not an Assassin's Creed fan. I never really played the game, but it would be cool to play this character who's well known from a different series in my game. And there's people who are voiced very strongly. They don't want these Universes Beyond cards in their game. You all have valid opinions, right? I kind of am in the opinion, though, like, don't yuck somebody else's yum. Like, in the long run, there aren't ever going to be products that are made for everybody. And one of Magic's goal in Universes Beyond is to try to bring more people to the game. I think Lord of the Rings did a good job of that, right? People who had not played Magic before, but could buy a commander deck with Sam and Frodo, right? And come and show up at Commander and play casually on Friday nights with their friends. That's a significant improvement. How that will resonate in a non-Lord of the Rings IP that is meant to do the same is what's questionable. I think if you're going to do Universes Beyond like that, it's got to be with larger IPs. Final Fantasy is big. Marvel is humongous. How do you top that, though? Like, what other IPs do you try to use for that same reason? And now it's a discussion for another time, but hello, one of the layoffs being the person who was in charge of of Universes Beyond, the best-selling set of all time, loses their job after making the company the most money they've ever made off of the game, makes absolutely no sense to me.
Yep.
Like I said, conversation for another time.
Sure.
But now that person's gone, and you want somebody else to fill that position to do what the set did.
Yeah.
Logic.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Logic.
that was amazing. Let's do that again. We fired the person who did that. Well, dang it, but do it again anyway. Like, it's
that
is
crazy.
That is nuts.
Yeah. But yeah, don't yuck somebody's yum. It's, at the end of the day, we're still playing Magic. Whether that card said Ezio on it or it was a new version of Aurelia, you'd still play it because you enjoy playing Magic.
Yeah.
And the person who enjoys the IP will enjoy playing with their Ezio. And Tom, who has never played Magic before, but has played Assassin's Creed and like, man, I gotta have these cards and I can play with them and there's a community. Let me join that. Is going to enjoy it. When you do things in excess, though, doesn't make much sense. So I think what some Magic players' opinions are is, well, let's keep making just our new Magic lore and exploring less return sets. Some players love when we go back to Ravnica. I think Ravnica is like this evergreen plane that we are fine to go there whenever you want. But some people just want to explore some of the worlds a bit more and would plan to do that in a Magic IP, right? As opposed to one offshoot of some other product. But that doesn't necessarily bring in new players. So there's never going to be products for everybody. But there are going to be products that you can play with and you can purchase. And the biggest thing that you could ever do to voice your opinion is either to buy the products or not, and engage in the market research when Wizard does it. When Wizards does that, you know, that's something they did say on their live stream the other day when they were talking about, you know, upcoming products, what we can expect out of Thunder Junction, for example, what we can expect out of the no longer epilogue boosters for that set, because they're going to be in the main set with different set symbols, and that's a whole nother conversation. You know, the products aren't going to be for everybody. And at the end of the day, we're still playing the game that we like. And if you have concerns about the products and you have comments that you want to make, it would be much more valuable to Wizards of the Coast if you voiced it in the market research that they collect the data from versus talking on Twitter about it.
Yes.
And, you know, you hope that the research is looked at and you bombard it with that. I think you see a lot of people post the links to that market research when Wizards blast it out. Tell us about your experience.
Yes,
fill that out.
They take surveys all the time. Take the time. Fill it out.
Survey.
Yeah, 100%. That's because that is what they're looking for, and those comments in those, you know, open field boxes are far more likely to get seen than a tweet that even has a million views on it, because it is very easy to discount those voices on the internet as a vocal minority. And but the market research, if enough people are saying the same things in the proper channels that they had to go out of their way to fill out, it's gonna carry more weight. It just will.
And the voices worked. Because not a lot of people bought Aftermath. And they voiced their opinion strongly in the market research, so much so that you aren't getting the same type of thing with Thunder Junction.
They were ready to do it and they pulled back. Exactly.
Right. And so if that doesn't speak for, you know, the willingness for Wizards of the Coast to listen to your concerns, I don't know what else. But
yeah, they did the same thing with the theme boosters as well. With Wilds of Eldraine, they had theme booster specific cards that they were going to release, but theme boosters were just a laughing stock. They were one of the worst products that Wizards had, and so they just didn't do them. And but they had these, you know, rares that they had designed to go into the theme boosters specifically that weren't, you know, geared towards limited, and so they just put them as like a sheet in the set boosters. You know, it's like, these are cool, still cool cards. We want you to have them. They're, you know, we have art, all the whole thing. So yeah, they'll just be, you know, random drops in the set boosters. You might be able to pick these up. Legal and Commander, all that jazz. Great. You know, and like, we don't have this garbage product clogging up, you know, shelves that nobody cares about. And yeah, they listen. That's the thing. And the other thing is, they're going to listen to where the purchases are coming from. You know, if the entrenched Magic fans, if the vast majority of entrenched Magic fans are saying we don't want Universes Beyond, but then twice as many people who don't consider themselves entrenched Magic fans buy the product, you know, buy the Universes Beyond product, they're going to keep doing it. You know, if it's making them money, they're going to continue. And if it's making them more money than the in-universe products, they're going to shift. You know, I don't think the Magic IP is going to die, you know, and not anytime soon anyway. And I'm pretty sure that's the sky is falling situation that people are claiming, is that we're going to lose all of Magic's internal IP and it's just going to become a rule set on which other, you know, IPs can be plastered. And I would be surprised if they let the history of Magic go. But I do want to point out something, and maybe as a Magic fan, maybe this is going to sound like a weird opinion, but Or I don't know. And if you're ever to ostracize me, cancel me, and wherever, it's fine. But for me, the part about Magic that I love is the mechanics and the gameplay. It's the interchange, the dynamics in the game. That's what I love. The story is neat. It is a neat flavor on top of the substance that I like, you know? And so I enjoy the story, but if the story ceased to exist, I would still have the game I love. Because the game I love is in the mechanics and the way that it plays. And so, yeah, you can have Ezio as your commander, and I'll play it against my Lara Croft, and you can have your Indoraptor or whatever. And like, yeah, we'll figure it out. Like, you know, at the end of the day, the game still plays just as well as I want it to. And that's fine, you know? And so for me, this isn't a threat at all. Like, not even a little bit, honestly. I don't mind the idea of the Universes Beyond filling in. And this is me changing my tune from where I have been. There are videos on my YouTube channel that are very poorly produced from many years ago now where I'm screaming about, they're bringing Rick Grimes, what the man? And anyway, I joined that whole discussion. But the more I see it, the less I care. And the less concerned I am. And it's bringing money and new players into our game, which is definitely a good thing. So, yeah, Marvel's a huge property. But you also mentioned the strength of the property is the key. Like they will. I don't think they're going to have another Lord of the Rings ever. I think Marvel will sell well, and Final Fantasy will sell well. They're targeting different market segments. I don't think the crossover that they got, because with Lord of the Rings specifically, the established Magic fan base, for the most part, was lit on fire, excited for that set. And a whole bunch of people who didn't care about Magic were also interested to see what was going on with it, you know? So you had that perfect storm situation. I don't think you get that with Final Fantasy. I don't think you get that with Marvel. I think there are plenty of entrenched Magic fans who, for whatever reason, haven't been exposed to those properties, you know? Or at least not to the level with the fandom that you would think or would like. Whereas I think the crossover with Lord of the Rings was very heavy. So I don't know. We'll see. But I fully anticipate the Assassin's Creed set is going to underperform by their metrics very hard. Yeah, because I feel like those games sell well because of the gameplay, not the characters and the story. So I would be shocked if that IP translates well into a successful Universes Beyond.
Some level of insane cards in that set for Modern.
They will
matter. And I unfortunately think, since they've overpowered lots of cards in the Modern Horizons set, as we can see evident by Ragavan and free spells, yada, yada, yada. Modern Horizons 3 is probably going to have something that rivals that.
Yep.
Or else the cards wouldn't be playable in the format. So then having back-to-back straight-to-modern sets, Assassin's Creed has to battle the back of Modern Horizons 3. That in itself, those sets releasing back-to-back like that is going to cause that clash.
Oh my goodness.
Probably going to cause Assassin's Creed to do significantly less sales. And also, the boosters only have 8 cards in them.
Oh, yeah. That's not ideal. Yeah, and in that situation, though, it's not the IP that I'm worried about. It's the power level that you're saying. That is, yeah. So okay, here's an idea for Modern Horizons 3. Go with me on this one. What about Ren and 6 Hogaaks? Go with me on this. I mean, it's right there.
Sounds great to me. Is it a Planeswalker, though?
Of course, yeah.
Oh, cool. I can play
maybe it's a flip card where you can cast it from your graveyard but the front face is a Planeswalker. I don't know. Like, and you can cast it for free if you, anyway, I don't know.
Front side, Ren was dead. Backside, not really.
Not really. Zombie Ren. That's okay. Yep. I'm here for it. Let's go. All right. I don't know, man. I'm tired. I'm getting a little off the rails. I apologize.
Oh yeah.
But
I feel you.
Yeah. So that's the thing that I'm concerned about is what's the power level going to be? At the end of the day, a bunch of new IPs coming in. Okay, cool. Let's see what happens next. How long is it going to be until we see Star Wars? You know, and what comes first, Star Wars or Star Trek? Where's the licensing?
Star Wars is coming out with its own TCG next month.
That everyone's going to talk about for 6 months, and then it's going to cease to exist.
Yes. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, but yeah. Anyway,
but you know, considering where we are with the cast and all, I would say, you know, just one thing to sort of round us out. MagicCon Chicago is next weekend.
It's happening,
and you boys are going to be there at the wonderful Windy City, at the sold out MagicCon Chicago, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So my understanding is larger than Vegas was. So we will be there. You'll see us moseying about. If you see me throughout the Commander play area, ask me to play a game. I would love to play a game. One thing that I like is going around and asking new people I've never met before to sit down and play a game. So I will have standard decks with me to play, even though I'm not playing in the standard main event. And I will have my Commander decks, of course, to play.
Heck yeah.
I, in particular, am going to be participating in two things at MagicCon. Number one, I'm going to be playing the second pod with Chaos Commander with Mr. Bevers on the stage on Friday at 2 p.m.
That's exciting.
Or at 12 p.m. So check that out. We're going to be playing together with Mental Misplay and Commander Mechanic. So check us out. And then I have a meet and greet time, which I will have tokens to hand out to everybody at 4 p.m. In the Creator Central. So make sure to stop by and say hi. I will give you Luna tokens and Clue tokens.
Heck yeah. That's amazing. And yeah, and I'll be around all weekend as well. I'm always up for a game, and I'll bring more Commander decks than I know what to do with. So even if you don't have one, I can hook you up. Let's make it happen. Very much looking forward to that. So yes, it's coming up. And I don't know what the forecast looks like, but if it's anything like it's been, not going to be nearly as bad as I anticipated. So I'm sure it'll be lovely. So hopefully we'll see you there. Yeah, don't hesitate. Yeah, we would love to meet you. Cool. Well, yeah, so let's go ahead and call it there, because I know, yeah, I clearly need to get some sleep before I get even more unhinged, because, yeah, that's always fun. But anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Before we go, Carlo, could you tell people where they can find you out on the interwebs?
Yeah, so you can find me. Links will be below for you. CFavretto_Jr. on all the platforms, from Twitch to Twitter to Instagram to TikTok. What else? Something. Who knows?
Friendster,
Anywhere.
Napster,
Anywhere.
LinkedIn. I don't know.
LimeWire.
Yeah. LimeWire, of course. Yes.
MySpace.
Aries,
like
Kaza.
But
Anyway,
yeah, check me out on any of those platforms. All those same handles.
Awesome. And you can find me on the places as well. Twitch primarily, HamHawks42. I'm also now, I now am also on Instagram and TikTok at Hawks42. So if you want to see me talking to myself, one of which is brandishing a cigar and wearing sunglasses, that is a thing. That's been a fun fun exploration. So yeah, go like those things. I would really appreciate it. And yeah, and stay tuned, like, subscribe on whatever application you're listening to this, so you can hear future editions of the MagicJank podcast. And yeah, we'll be back before you know it. So thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you on the next one.
Catch you later.